progress.
It said repute recording, that's fine. 1 second. There's people coming online. There's another couple of minutes. He's being recorded. Oh, come on, I missed. It is recording, and we have participants, so it's working. Take the mask off now. Okay.
Very good morning, everyone. We're all familiar with the concept of the fact that the word Nachamu is repeated twice at the onset of this week's Haftorah. And the Shabbat takes its name from the Haftorah, Shabbat Nachamu. So it says, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elokeichem. So it is the Chazal Darshan immediately. It says that Chet Chota Yerushalayim, so there the cause of the Churban is delineated as being two, Chet Chota, and therefore the punishment was two. Loksa b'kiflayim, which is in this week's Haftarah. The Yerushalayim was punished b'kiflayim, a double portion, so to speak, and therefore it needs a nechama, it needs a consolation that will also be kiflayim, a double portion. So on the surface, it's very difficult to understand what does it mean, Loksa b'kiflayim. Was punished twice, so that we could say, oh yeah, there were two Batei Mikdash, there were two temples, and both of them were destroyed. So that is the idea of Loksa b'kiflayim. And so then what would be the Nechama b'kiflayim? That the two temples would be rebuilt. However, there's a deeper understanding here that the Meforshim discuss, and that all of us know to be true from our own life experience. And that is as follows. No person or no event, no building, no entity is indispensable. But on the other hand, no person, no building, no event is replaceable. Whatever happens afterwards is not the same as what went before. And therefore, the very flat fact that it is replaced is a reminder that something was destroyed. And let's take a mundane example. A piece of furniture in a person's home. That was destroyed, or an item that was stolen. The insurance company makes good. We replace it. So even if we replace it with as close a copy as is humanly possible, but every time we look at the replacement, we are reminded that the original was destroyed. That's not the original chair. There's a famous chair in the Breslover Shiur here in Yerushalayim. So that chair was the chair of Nachman of Breslov. And it was in Europe, I don't know, in Oman, it was the Chassidim wanted to bring the chair to Jerusalem. And actually there was no permission to do so, because all of these artifacts are of tremendous economic importance to the Ukraine. The whole tourism to the Ukraine is really only Hasidic Jews. There are not many people in the world that really are interested to visit the Ukraine. So the Hasidim took the chair apart, sliver by sliver, and smuggled it into Jerusalem, and painstakingly restored it so that it was no longer pieces, but it was the chair. And it's here. So a man came along and he said, I don't know why you have to go through all of this trouble. If you would have told me, I would have given you any amount of money you need, and we would have built an exact replica of the chair. To which the answer obviously was, there is no exact replica of the chair. That's the chair of Nachman sat in. The chair that you built, it's the exact same thing, but it's not the chair he sat in. And people are sensitive enough to realize that that's the difference. And therefore things are not replaceable. So that's Loksa b'Kiflayim. Even when the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash was built, so Chazal tell us, Skadim Shebo Sudor, the elderly who were alive and saw the first Beit HaMikdash yet, 70 years earlier, they wept in despair. The young people rejoiced because they were building the Beit HaMikdash. We have a temple restored. The old people wept because they said that's not the Beit HaMikdash. That's a replacement. Replacement is never the original. And Chazal therefore pointed out that the second Beit HaMikdash Many of the miracles that existed in the first Beit HaMikdash did not exist in the second Beit HaMikdash. Because you can replace bricks and stone, but you can't replace miracles. And we see that in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, there's a repetition of the Aseret HaDvorim, of the revelation at Sinai, the 10 Commandments, so to speak. All of us notice, and I discussed it this week in one of our little sessions between Mincha and Ma'ariv. The great thing about those sessions is that they're not long enough for anyone to fall asleep. So we discussed with those that were present, the text is not the same. The text of the Aseret HaDvorim that appears in Parshat Yitro, in Chumash Shmot, differs from the text that Moshe Rabbeinu writes here in Va'etchanan. So all of the wise scholars, you see, it's different. There wasn't such a thing. They can't even agree on the text. But that's really a foolish way to look at it, because whoever composed it would have realized that it's different, right? And if they wanted to doctor it up, then they would have made it exactly the same. So there's a great lesson here. The Torah wrote it differently to teach us that the first luchos were not replaceable. We have luchos now. And the luchos are Nichtav Elokim. Kaviyachal Rabban Shalom wrote the 10 Commandments on the luchos. And the import and idea is the same, but it's not the same. So that every time we read Va'etchanan, we become aware of the fact that Moshe broke the first set of luchos. We relive that tragedy. So even though it's a time of joy for us, that the Lord forgave us, so to speak, and that we received the second set of luchos, and those luchos were in the Aron Kodesh and in the Beit HaMikdash for millennia. But the Torah itself indicates that it was not the same. It was not replaceable. And that's why the Gemara says that luchos v'shivrei luchos, the luchos and the broken pieces of the first luchos, Munachim ba'aron, they're both in the Aron Kodesh. So the simple explanation is that the broken pieces that Moshe shattered, the luchos, they picked up those shattered pieces and put them in the luchos. But there's an exalted interpretation. The fact that there were another set of luchos in the Aron Kodesh automatically reminded them that there was a shattered piece of luchos. There were luchos that didn't make it anymore. And that they're not replaceable. They're not interchangeable. So we know that with people. People can rebuild their lives and should rebuild their lives after tragedies and after losses. That's part of life. That's a v'charta b'chaim. should always choose life. But we all know that people are not replaceable. Again, that's why we don't count people directly, because you can count a dozen eggs and say that each of the eggs is the same, maybe, but you can't count a dozen people and say each of the personages involved is exactly the same. In our generations, when we are accustomed to enormous populations, something which really didn't exist until the past century. So the worth of an individual has declined because of the fact that there are so many others. But that's a very narrow way of looking at things, because every individual is irreplaceable. There'll be other people. There can be children that are almost clones of their parents or grandparents, but they're not the same. And therefore, in the description of the Aseret Advarim, the Torah purposely allowed for the text to be changed. And the question arose, was this the text that existed on the second set of luchos? In other words, in the first set of luchos, it said, Zochar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Remember the Sabbath day. So we all know that Zochar and Shomor b'dibur echad. Somehow God is able to pronounce two words at the same time. And the people were able to hear two words at the same time, simultaneously, something which is completely unnatural and we cannot do with that. So, but that's as far as oral, speaking, audible, hearing. What was written? What was written on the second set of luchos? And I mentioned this week that I had a conversation with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, his famous commentary to Chumash, Emes L'Yaakov. And his contention is that on the second luchos, second set of stones that Moshe brought down, it was written Shomor. It was written what's in Parshas V'Etchanan. And it was purposely written to show you that the first was not replaceable. Those luchos are gone. And you'll say, so what's the difference? Luchos are luchos. That's true. But all of us know that there is a difference. It's what I had a Jew in Muncie, a tremendous person, who was he had a very boutique niche business. He made picture frames, but not picture frames for your living room. Picture frames for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Shah of Iran was a client of his. Nelson Rockefeller was a client. So I always attempted to instill a little culture into the students of my yeshiva. which was a difficult thing to do. I mean, the limits of culture were the New York Rangers. So once a year, I got permission from him, and we would take a group of students to his workshop in New York, and he would discuss art and picture frames. And so we went one year, I remember, and he had this beautiful, enormous frame he was working on. So one of the young men asked him the direct question, how much are you going to charge for that picture frame? Right, you sit next to an American in 5 minutes, he asks you how much money you make. So he answered, this picture frame is $250,000. $250,000 for a picture frame. How can that be worth it? So he said, I'll show you. He said, you see, this client bought a Rembrandt for $12.5 million then. I'm talking 30 years ago. If you buy a Rembrandt for $12.5 million, you don't go to Woolworth and get a picture frame. Because we have to bring out the highlights of it. You have to make it alive. So I'm going to do that. So then he will feel that his $12.5 million is well worth it. But if I leave it the way it is, just a canvas, it's still a Rembrandt, but it's not the same at all. The frame is what does it. And then he said, the man had a problem. He had to have it authenticated that it was a real Rembrandt. He says, because there are copies that are exactly the same. It's called From the School of Rembrandt. It was his assistants painted it. You know, he was trying to make money, so he did the same painting 3 or 4 times. He did the original, and his assistants copied it. So he said, if it's authenticated that we have provenance, that it's a real Rembrandt, that Rembrandt is the one that painted it, and that his signature is legitimate, so then it's worth $12.5 million. If, however, that is not the case, it's merely a copy. So even though the copy is exactly the same, it's beautiful. If you're not an expert, you really can't tell the difference. And nevertheless, it's no longer worth $12.5 million. Because the real Rembrandt is not replaceable. Can't be copied. So I derived from that a great lesson. There's a pasuk that says, "Vayamuna sitecho, chosen Yeshuos, chochmas vadas, yiras Hashem hi otzoro." We say that posuk in V'yit and B'cho every Saturday night. Posuk from Tanakh. So the Gemara darshans, Emunas itecha, Chosen Yeshuos, Chochmos Vadas. Those 6 words represent the 6 Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Emunah is Zroyim, the laws of agriculture, because the farmer is dependent upon faith. He puts seed in the ground. He has to believe that somehow it'll grow. At the end of the day, he'll have tomatoes to sell. Itecha is zmanim, time. So those are the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov, the holidays, the Jewish calendar. Chosen is protection. So the Gemara says that's Noshin. That's the section of the Mishnah that deals with marriage, with family, with the relationship between men and women, because that's our protection. And the Yeshuos, the Gemara says, is Nizikin, has to do with the laws of business and of damages, rights and wrongs, monetary things. So the salvation of society is that it has an orderly way of dealing with these things. Chochmas, wisdom is Seder Kodshim, which that deals with the Beis Hamikdash, which is a superior form of wisdom. And Das, knowledge, is Taharos, which deals with the laws of purity, which is the ultimate wisdom. So you have here these 6 orders of the Mishnah that contain all the basic ideas of the Torah and all the basic ideas of life and are inspirational to us. Great value to us. But then the second half of the posuk says, Yiras Hashem hi otzoro. Yiras Hashem, fear of God, respect, tradition, observance. That is the treasure, the box that you put all of this into. So that's the picture frame. You've got this beautiful canvas of Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, but you have nothing that enhances it. Nothing that makes it beautiful. Only if there's Yiras Hashem that holds it all together. So then the 6 sections of the Mishnah become a whole and have a great purpose to it. In my little book of stories, I have a story there. It's one of my favorite stories. When I came to Israel in 1967, it's over 50 years ago. So then in Israel, not only did they not have supermarkets, they didn't have bags, they didn't have anything. You had to bring your own sow. You had to bring your own basket with you when you went to the store in order to take them things home. I didn't know that. I'm coming from Miami Beach where they bag it for you and somebody takes it out and puts it into your car. I'm not going to punch you with it. So I went one morning to buy breakfast for my wife and myself. So I bought some yogurts and I bought a little milk and I bought some bread and 7, 8 items, tomatoes. So he's got it all on the counter and he adds it up and he says how much it was. And I paid him and I'm standing there. And he says to me, "No." I didn't do what? What do you want me to do? He says, "Kach et zeh." Take it off the counter. So I said, "Yesh sakit? You have a bag?" He said, "I thought tzarich levi sal, ma zeh sakit." You have to bring your own basket. So I ended up putting yogurt in my pocket. And, and I'm walking like this home. So I said to myself, that's the posuk. You got all of these wonderful things and you can't take it with you. Can't bring it home. You can know all the shas, but if there's no Yiras Hashem, how are you going to bring it home? So you need a framework. You need a frame for the portrait. You need a bag for the groceries. You have to understand what the Torah is talking to us about. So the Torah is teaching us that things are not replaceable. Yes, sir, the Dvorim are not replaceable. The second luchas are not going to be the first. The second temple wasn't the first. And I think that's, if I may say so, that's part of what to look at what goes on in Israel today. And at our third and latest attempt at nationalism here in our holy land. Whatever it is, it's not what it was. We should know that. If you know that, then you can deal with it. But if you're trying to say that it should be what it was, so then it's a very difficult thing, because it will always suffer by comparison, especially when the comparison is with our imagination and not necessarily with the reality of what was. So the Luchos Shniyos have a tremendous value to us in all areas of life, not just the 10 mitzvahs that it discusses, because it gives us an outlook on things. It gives us an ability to deal with life. And that's what the Torah really wanted to impart to us. That's the Torah's Chaim. It's the Torah of life. So in life, God will grant us second luchos. He'll forgive us. He'll bring comfort to us. Double measure of comfort. But the comfort will be different than what was. Because what was is not replaceable. And that really is the eternal secret of life itself. So have a great Shabbat, everyone. Thank you for coming. And
thank you very much, Rabbi. It was a pleasure to come home. May you continue to have all these wonderful